Hey guys, Matthew. In today's video, I'm going to be teaching you guys exactly the checklist that I go through when checking on a new PoB to see whether I think the build is actually good or if it's bait. Now, this has come in the last week, in the last few days. There's been a ton of drama in the PoE community in regards to build making, witch hunts, basically content creators, and I'm not going to name drop anybody, but people going out of their way to get their audience to, downvote Reddit posts and dislike videos in mass, just because they don't agree with the builds that other people are making. And to some extent, I think that's disgusting behavior, but I actually kind of understand where it stems from, right? It stems from the fact that league starts and having a good league start is actually dear to people's heart. Some people go out of their way to take the weekend off or even the first week of a league off work just in order to be able to play the game. And if their experience is severely diminished to some extent, some people will actually completely quit the game all the way up until the next league 3 months later to have another go at a league start and hopefully have a better one. And when someone is the reason why this happens, even though it's not entirely the creator's fault if you as a player get baited, there's definitely some part of the blame there, and it sucks, right? So in today's video, I'm going to make sure that anytime you open a PoB from now on, you'll know exactly what to look for in order to be able to tell if a build is good or not. I myself, in my upcoming, or my league start for the upcoming Lake of Kalana League, have been under heavy fire about that. Basically, the build being completely unplayable. Now, for me, it's a little bit different because I showcase pretty much everything on stream. I make videos showcasing the build in action. Like, I make it so that if someone actually messes up with the build that I'm making, well, I couldn't have done anything to help them anymore. And that's essentially how I make sure to not get in these situations where I'm the target of those sort of witch hunts. However, somehow happened this time around. So what I decided to do is I'm actually going to grab a PoB that I made myself. This is from my General Cry League starter, and I'm going to go through this same checklist that I do with any other build in order to be able to tell whether I think it's a good league starter or not. Now, this is specifically for league starter builds, okay? This is not going to apply for a build which you're going to be making as a secondary, as a third build, etc., like anything like that. Because of course you can be much more lax later on when you have currency, where you can afford items. The thing about league starters is that not every skill is built equal, and you want to try to have the best possible league start. You want to try to play one of the most meta skills because of course it's going to require the least amount in order to do the best, deal the most damage, be the most tanky, be the fastest at clearing maps, whatever it may be. Okay, so let's get started on the actual checklist. So the first thing that we're going to do, which is actually number 0, is to check the level, right? That's the first thing I do when I open a PoB, is I'll look at the level of the actual league start budget. So here you can see that there's many different trees, and it starts at level 77, but then I typically think that a league starter tree should be around level 90 to 92. I think above 92, 93, 94 is kind of okay, but above like 95 is where I'm in the category where I'm like, oh, this is too high. Like, most people are not going to get there. So when I make build guides, it's typically 90, 91, but 92 to 94 can be okay as well. So looking at the 90, and then the next thing I'm going to do is make sure that everything is okay so that I have the actual setup for that specific budget. So it's going to be the budget one, which is what I need. And then before the actual skill sets came out, or maybe I had just never realized it existed, I used to do this to differ on the different budgets, but now we could just instead use the skill sets. But this is a bit of an older PoB, so let's go ahead and just turn everything on. Okay, good. So that everything's turned on, we have the default budget set up with the budget tree, and it's level 90, which is perfect. All right, the next thing we're going to look at is the config and figuring out the sources of each and every one of the checkboxes that we've here. Now, normally, if you were to actually have the attention span and go and actually watch the entirety of the build guide video, whoever the content creator is probably going to go out and tell you where you are getting each and every one of these different things which are ticked in the configs so that there's no leaving it to interpretation, right? So for example, this build gets power charges, frenzy charges, and endurance charges simply from this this node here on a cluster, which is called mob mentality. However, on the level 90 budget tree, we don't get that, right? So it's not entirely true that we would always have power charges, frenzy charges, and endurance charges. Matter of fact, we would only get frenzy charges from this sword mastery here, so we would get no power charges. And as for endurance charges, well, this build does use Endure Cry, considering, well, it's obviously a Warcry build, so it would get endurance charges. So that's only fair. Next, it would get Onslaught from the actual cluster, the one that we do have at level 90. It's a single medium cluster. That's typically what I try to aim for in my League Starter, is one single medium, because a lot of the time they can add a lot of value. So this gives us Onslaught. And then the next thing we're going to look at is Tailwind. Now, Tailwind is from the boots. However, on the budget, we don't have Tailwind boots, so we'd have to remove that. Then the Rage. Now, this is a very good way to inflate your PoB numbers on a build like this. So I like to put the absolute minimum Rage. So obviously this is a Berserker, which uses Warbringer. So we are sacrificing 10 Rage if you have at least 25 Rage, but we grant 10 Rage per 5 power if we have less than 25. So essentially, anytime that we're less than 25 Rage when we Warcry, we are going to go back to full because of the Red Blade banner. So I actually have it at 20, which is the absolute minimum amount of Rage that you would pretty much ever have. Next box is, have you used a Warcry recently? Well, we're a Warcry build, so I would hope so. And how many? Well, 2. Now, the reason for that is because if you go to our main skill and we look at General Cry, you'll see that it has a cooldown of 1.7 seconds. And, of course, recently refers to 4 seconds, right? So that would mean that essentially we've used 2 Warcries recently. Next, are we cycloning? We are always cycloning. That's how we desecrate on this build. And therefore, since we're cycloning, our infusion is active. Now, a lot of people gave me some flack because of this Pride Ore effect that I had put at maximum effect. But I don't think that people realize that if you actually look at the Pride Aura, the radius is massive on that thing. It's literally half your screen. So as long as the monster is well within range for your actual Blade Flurry to hit, then you are definitely going to be on maximum effect. Now, stance, blood stance, and stance, I pretty much always stayed in blood stance when I was playing the build. So there's that. Then, another very important part is enemy stats. You want to always be on Guardian and Pinnacle Boss. Because that's where you actually want to know how much damage you're doing. If you open up a PoB and it's on like no, definitely instantly change that to Guardian and Pinnacle Boss. Anytime people are talking about PoB DPS, they're talking about Guardian and Pinnacle Boss. So just leave that there. Now, map modifiers and play debuff, you pretty much leave that completely empty on almost all circumstances. There's just a few cases where you don't. And then we have Taunted. Now, Taunted is from the fact that we are a Warcry build, so we taunt by default. Intimidated is coming from our Cluster Jewel. Enemies taunted by your Warcries are intimidated, which is good. And then we also have Crushed. Now, Crushed is actually not currently available because it comes from the actual Awakened version of Brutality, which gives us Crush for 4 seconds. And there's also Crush up here, which we don't get. So, Crush would actually be fake. So we're going to go ahead and remove that. Alright, now that we've basically gone through the entirety of the config and figuring out the sources of each of these modifiers and removing the ones that don't apply, we can basically move on with the build, or the checklist of benchmarks. And the next thing is going to be check the items and then price check everything. So, if I was to open up a PoB and I'm a newer player, or maybe even I'm not a newer player, but it's just the type of build I've never played, and I see a bunch of unique items and I have no idea what these actually cost, there is this really handy website called PoE Antiquery, which allows you to verify the price of basically every single unique and other type of items in the game from basically the history of the prices. So for example, we could see that if I need an Ichimonji on this build, I can go to PoE Antiquery, go to Unique Weapons, type in Ichimonji, right? And then you can see that in Arch Nemesis League, it started at 10C. Then if you look at like for Scourge League, it started at 10C. Expedition, it started at 2C, and so on. Now, if you wanted to know the stats for the previous league that just finished, we'd actually have to head over to PoE Ninja. So we could do the same thing here. Look at Ichimonji, and then we can see that Ichimonji started at 3C this league. Now, by having an idea of how much it was last league versus how much it was in the previous, so many leagues, it can give you a bit of an idea of what you can expect to pay for Ichimonji and whether you think you'll be able to earn enough currency to be able to buy the item if the content creator who made the build told you that was a mandatory item. For example, this build, Red Blade Banner, is kind of mandatory. And Red Blade Banner is not the cheapest of the cheapest unique. So if we head over to PoE Ninja, we can see that Red Blade Banner at the start of the league was 49C, which is not that crazy expensive. You could easily do some endless heists or anything else to earn that chaos, even chaos recipe. But if we head over to PoE Antiquery and we check for, again, Red Blade Banner, we could see that in Arch Nemesis it started nearly 200C. In Scourge it was very cheap, 25C. In Expedition it was also very cheap, 10C, and so on, right? So we could check at all of them. Now we do have to note that sometimes some of these uniques do get changed, and that can have a drastic actual impact on the prices. But yeah, then once I've actually price checked every single one of the uniques and seen that I think and decided, yeah, I think that I'm going to be able to afford all these different items, I can move on and head over to the skills and basically do the same thing. So we're going to look at the skills, look at, you know, are there awakened gems in there? Are there exceptional gems? Are there exceptional awakened gems? I would hope not. You know, and that's what we're going to look for. And then we're also going to look for the level of the gems and, you know, whether they have quality. Now, I don't think that it's too unrealistic to throw in like a level 21 gem with no quality and then 20/20 for the rest of them, as you would probably self-level and self-flip them. But having everything at 20 and nothing on the quality is even better to see, because it means that it's that much more realistic of what you can expect. So you can see the auras are not supported by Enlighten or anything like that. Neither are any of the buffs with Empowerers or nothing like that. We get to choose one of the movement abilities of our choice. We have a cast with damage taken set up, and then our cyclone set up, as well as our curses and our totems. So we know now that none of these, absolutely none of these, are particularly expensive. So now we know that the skills and the, you know, are price checked and good to go, we can move on. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to verify defenses sitting in Hideout. Now this is super important because I can open up a POB and it's going to tell me that I have, you know, 78k Fizz max hit and 60k EHP, and that's all going to look fine and dandy, but it actually doesn't necessarily mean that the build is going to feel good. So what I'm going to do here is I'm essentially going to strip the build of all of its non-permanent defenses. So in our case, because we are a Warcry build, we get to use Endurance Cry very often, which means we're not going to remove the endurance charges, but in some builds we actually have to remove them. But yeah, in our case, it's fine. Next, we would go ahead and remove all the flasks, and then of course we would also remove any sort of defensive, what are they called? Guard skills, right? So in their case, it's Molten Shell, right? So once I've removed all of that, I'm essentially going to benchmark the numbers that I want to see in order to tell me whether I think the defenses are going to be good enough or not. So now these are going to be my personal benchmark for Softcore Trade League, because it's much easier to fix than, say, in Hardcore. But that's what I personally look for in terms of progression. When I say progression, I'm talking about essentially getting to maps and getting all the way to like T16s. Now, once you get into T16s, you start getting your 4 Void Stones, so you can start doing more juice content, you know, and interacting with more juicy mechanics. That's when these numbers are going to start needing to go up. But there is a large misunderstanding and misconception right now of what is actually required to clear T16 maps on any build, because I can tell you that 2 million DPS is way more than you'll ever need to actually clear a T16 map. And same thing with like 20k Fizz max hit. Alright, so looking at the defenses with everything completely stripped off, we have 20k EHP, which is definitely a bit on the low side here. That's mostly due to the fact that we have no avoidance from no evasion. Our Fizz max hit is 15k, our Elemental max hit is 20k. This is, I would say, good enough. It's not amazing, but it's absolutely fine, because again, this is without any of your actual defenses set up. This is literally sitting AFK in your hideout. You can take a 15k max hit from Fizz, which is not horrible. Again, this will not be squishy in maps as long as you don't play it, well, completely horribly. But it does depend. Playstyle is dependent on the build. For example, when it comes to General Cry Blade Flurry, you want to play it more like a ranger build than an actual melee build. You don't want to be, you know, spinning through packs. Okay, now when I verified the defenses, and personally, what I look for, and I'll type it here, is around 20k plus EHB and 10 to 15k plus, actually it's more like 15k plus Fizz max hit. Now, this is only for progression and only for super cheap budgets. I'm talking the cheapest of the cheap. The moment that you invest even, say, 5x onto your build, these numbers should start going up by a decent amount, for sure. For example, I believe that my build this league has around 12k max Fizz hit taken on the mapping setup, as like your actual like day 1, day 2 setup. But as soon as you go into like the mid budget, which is like slightly later on, I think the max Fizz hit goes up by 3 times or something. So yeah, it goes up quite fast. Now, of course, what I'll do is I'm going to then turn on the defenses, all the defenses, and look at it afterwards. So I'm going to turn on my Molten Trail, turn on my Flask, and now you can see that it has 60k EHB and around 80k Fizz max hit. And I would say that this is absolutely plenty fine for up to like those T16 maps and even more. Like this amount of defense is going to feel very good all the way up until you really start to do some juicier content such as bosses, you know, Uber Elder, Maven, of course all the actual Ubers. That's when these numbers are going to start to be lacking. But in terms of just regular mapping, even like rituals and breaches and blights and all that, these defenses are plenty. But yeah, I look at it basically with no defenses, so I strip all of it, and I'm looking for 20k EHB and 15k plus max hit. Now, these are not super hard numbers to hit, and again, that's because I'm a softcore player. Okay, next we're going to look at the next thing we want to look at, which is basically verify the mana and life recovery. So essentially, how much does the mana cost? How much mana unreserved do I have? How many times does this the cost go every second? And then what is my recovery on mana? So you can see that this skill here is every, we were saying earlier, let's see, so main skill, General Cry is every almost 1.8 seconds, and it's costing 9 mana. So essentially we'll need about 18 mana, right? Or sorry, no. We'll need about, since it's every 2 seconds and it costs 9 mana, we'll need 4.5 mana regen per second in order to be able to sustain permanently casting our Blade Flurry without having any mana issues ever. And right now we have 11.9, which means we are perfectly within the numbers that we need. This is more than enough. Of course, it's not like this is your only skill. You'd also have to look at your other skill. Like, for example, how much does your Berserk cost? How much does your Flame Dash or your Smoke Mine or whatever cost? But you could easily do that by just basically changing it under main skill and having a look at the mana cost. But in terms of the mana here, every 2 seconds we use 9 mana and we're regenerating 12 per second. This is more than adequate. Then comes life recovery. This is not always important because some builds will not really have any life recovery. They'll have like a block instead, or they'll have like ghost shrouds, right? There's multiple ways. I call it life recovery, but I guess I should just say recovery in general. So this build, as you can see, is actually degenning 200 life per second. Now, that would look really bad if you weren't aware, but Rite of Ruin gives you lose 0.1% life per second per rage, while not losing rage, so that's degenning us quite a bit. And then the rest of the degen is actually coming from Blood Rage, which we need for attack speed. As you can see, the moment we turn off Blood Rage, we stop degenning, even with the node over here. So that's why we're degenning. That's not a problem whatsoever because we have Leech on this build from, well, Blood Rage, of course. So that's why that's no issue for us. Now, once I figured out that I have some recovery on the build, be it regen, leech, overleech, life gained on hit, anything like that, and that my mana cost is going to be fine, the last thing I'm going to look at is essentially how much damage does this do, right? Am I going to be able to kill stuff with this? And then, of course, I'm just going to look at the DPS. For example, this is sitting at 16 million DPS. Now, this is known to be a build that has a significant amount of damage on an extremely cheap budget, and it keeps doing that even to this day. But I do want to finish off the video, because I've pretty much gone over the entirety of the checklist of what I look for. I want to finish off the video of talking about expectations that people have of builds, because I think that it's getting completely out of hand. People expect builds, and this is from what I've read on, Reddit comments and YouTube comments and just what people say in Twitch chats. People expect builds to be able to do at least like 4 to 5 million DPS. They expect their build to be cheap. They expect their build to be able to clear maps quickly. And they also expect their build to be super tanky. You can't have all of that. There's pretty much only ever been 2 builds that was able to offer you all of this. And one of them was Seismic Trap and the other one was Detonate Dead. Those are the only 2 builds that potentially were able to encompass all those different things at once in a League starter scenario. Otherwise, most builds are going to lack severely into one of those departments. Maybe it won't be cheap, maybe it won't be that fast, maybe it won't be that tanky, maybe it won't deal that much damage. There's always going to be something, because otherwise it's going to get nerfed. Look at Seismic, look at DD, they got nerfed. Why? Because of course they were too strong. So that's just something I wanted to mention. And another thing is DPS. Like, people are expecting 4 to 5 million DPS on their League starters, and I think that this is a misconception. If your build actually had a true 5 million DPS, you would kill Maven within 10 seconds. She has around 50 million HP. 10 seconds to phase Maven instantly, right? That's really quite fast for a League starter, especially if you want it to be tanky, if you want it to be cheap, and if you want it to be fast. So I think people need to lower their expectations when it comes to League starters, that they're not even having to invest more than a couple exalts into them. I would expect no more than up to like 2 million damage and decent clear speed. That's what my actual standards would be, because guess what? At 2 million damage, if you actually have decent defenses, you are capable of doing Maven. It will take a little bit of time, but it's definitely doable. You'll be capable of doing Uber Elder, which essentially means you'll be able to get your Void Stones so that you can keep progressing towards where you can start making more currency to invest more into your build. Anyways, hopefully this video was both informational and insightful. Hopefully you learned, a little bit more about how to fail-proof a build, to know whether or not you are getting yourself into, a bad deal, or whether it's actually going to be just fine. Before I go, as always, I do want to say a massive thank you to my supporters. So the 3 Alexes, Skady, Bearded Abe, Brandon, Gustavo, Tim, Domosame, Desu, Miss, Jarl, Loopold, Mercury, as well as Nake, Patrick, Rascol, Bird, Rocky, Solmok, Exo, The Great Master, Thomas Mass, Maestro, Nailed, Ven, Bitizen, Nectarion, Noi, Xethion, and Larsis. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.